The testimonies shared on this channel come directly from those who have generously opened their hearts to us, offering their personal experiences and perspectives. We invite you to approach these stories with compassion and understanding, as they reflect the unique journeys of each individual. Today's story comes from a sister in Iran, and it's a deeply moving and tragic account that you won't want to miss. Please stay with us until the end to fully grasp her experience. You'll understand why this story is so important. Now let's hear from Zab. My name is Zab Alavi, and this is the story of how my world was turned upside down. I was born and raised in Tehran, the capital of Iran, in a devout Muslim family. Faith was woven into every aspect of our lives. My father, a highly respected man in our community, was unwavering in his commitment to Islamic teachings. My mother, though gentler in her ways, was equally devout, her prayer beads slipping silently through her fingers as she whispered prayers in the corner of our home. In my world, questioning wasn't encouraged. From a young age, I learned to pray 5 times a day, memorize Quranic verses, and follow the traditions passed down for generations. Islam wasn't just a belief, it was my identity. But everything changed when I was enrolled in an Armenian private high school. My father chose it for its academic excellence, despite it being run by Armenian Christians, the largest ethnic minority in Iran. I expected to feel like an outsider, maybe even unwelcome. But what I found was something entirely different. On my first day, I walked into the classroom feeling nervous. A group of girls stood chatting and laughing, their warmth filling the room. One of them, a girl named Lilith, waved me over with a friendly smile. A small cross hung around her neck, catching my attention. "Are you Muslim?" she asked, not with judgment, but with genuine curiosity. "Yes," I answered, instinctively bracing myself. "That's okay," she said, still smiling. "We're happy to have you here." I didn't know what to make of her kindness. It was different from anything I'd expected. As time passed, I began noticing how these Armenian students lived out their faith. They spoke about Jesus with familiarity, as if he were a friend rather than a distant figure to fear and obey. They were honest, kind, and compassionate, even when no one was watching. One day, I saw a group of them sitting in a circle, holding hands and praying. Their prayers were soft and sincere, filled with love and hope. It was nothing like the rigid, structured prayers I had known. I didn't say anything, but something about that moment stayed with me. The more I observed, the more curious I became. These students didn't try to argue about religion or force their beliefs on anyone. They simply lived what they believed, and it was beautiful. One day, I asked Lilith why Christians wore crosses. "It reminds us of what Jesus did for us," she said. "He died on the cross to save us from our sins because he loves us." Her words unsettled me. In Islam, Jesus, known as Isa, was a prophet, not the Son of God. But the way she spoke about him made me wonder, was there more to the story? Then, during a literature class assignment on historical texts, I found something that would change everything. While searching the library, my fingers landed on a book I had never touched before, a Bible. My hands trembled as I pulled it from the shelf. It felt forbidden. But as I flipped through the pages, my eyes landed on a verse that stopped me in my tracks. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." And in that moment, everything began to change. "I will give you rest." The words leapt off the page, simple yet powerful. For a moment, it felt like they were meant just for me. My heart pounded as I quickly shut the book and placed it back on the shelf, but the words lingered, echoing in my mind. At home, everything was as it had always been. My father expected excellence in school and had already made it clear that I would marry someone of his choosing after graduation. Preserving our family's honor and faith was his highest priority. Zab, he would say, you are a reflection of this family. Never forget who you are and where you come from. I nodded as I always did, but deep inside, something was shifting. I wasn't sure who I was anymore. The more I learned about Christianity, the more questions I had about my own faith. But I couldn't talk to anyone, not even my mother. By the time I graduated from high school, I had developed a deep respect for Christians. I didn't fully understand their beliefs, but I admired their kindness, peace, and courage. Still, I pushed those thoughts aside as I prepared to leave Tehran for university, unaware that my true journey was just beginning. A new chapter. Moving away felt like stepping into a different world. The city I relocated to wasn't as bustling as Tehran, but it had its own charm. Narrow streets filled with vendors, colorful markets, and a university campus that buzzed with energy. For the first time, I was away from my family, away from the constant watchful eyes that had shaped my life. It didn't take long to notice that this city was different. Unlike Tehran, where religion was woven into every aspect of life, here I found a community that embraced diverse beliefs. I saw women walking freely without headscarves, men reading books I knew were banned, and whispers of underground gatherings where people worshipped without fear, even though it was dangerous. One afternoon in the library, I overheard a group of students speaking in hushed voices. They were talking about a church meeting. My heart skipped a beat when one of them mentioned the name of Jesus. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but their passion and fearlessness fascinated me. I knew that Christians in Iran often faced persecution, yet these students spoke with such conviction. Later that day, I recognized one of them. Her name was Layla, and she was in my philosophy class. She had a warm, confident presence, the kind of person who made you feel at ease instantly. "Hey, Zab," she said after class, smiling. "Want to grab some tea and talk about today's lecture?" I hesitated. I barely knew her, but something about her sincerity made me say, "Sure." As we sat in a small cafe near campus, the conversation flowed effortlessly. She asked about my life in Tehran, my family, my thoughts on university. I asked her about hers, and then she said something that caught me completely off guard. "My family's Christian." She said it so casually, like it was no big deal. "Oh," I replied, trying to hide my surprise. She smiled. "I know it's not common here. We have to be careful, but I'm not ashamed of who I am." Her words stayed with me long after we parted ways. Crossing the line. A few weeks later, Layla invited me to a gathering. "It's just a small group of friends," she said. "We talk about life, read some things, and pray together. You're welcome to join." I knew what she meant. It was a Christian gathering. I should have said no. But curiosity got the better of me. That evening, I found myself standing outside a small house on the outskirts of the city. The meeting was held in a basement. 15 or so people sitting in a circle. Some held Bibles, others simply sat with their eyes closed. I felt like I was stepping into forbidden territory, but no one looked at me with suspicion. No one judged me. Layla introduced me, and a man named Amir led the gathering. He spoke about love, forgiveness, and hope, not in a rigid, rehearsed way, but as if he had truly experienced them. Then they sang, soft, heartfelt hymns that filled the room with something I had never known before: peace. As the meeting ended, Amir walked over and handed me a small, pocket-sized Bible. "Take it," he said, his voice gentle. I stared at the book in his hands, knowing that if I accepted it, there would be no turning back. "Read it if you ever feel like it. It's yours." Amir's words echoed in my mind as I clutched the small Bible and stepped out into the night. Back in my room, I sat on my bed, staring at the book in my hands. My heart pounded as I flipped through its pages. It felt like I was doing something forbidden, and yet I couldn't stop. I skimmed through passages at random until one verse gripped me. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I froze. How could Jesus claim to be the way? In Islam, all prophets were considered equal. But here he was, making a statement unlike any other. The words stirred something deep inside me, questions I wasn't ready to face. A growing conflict. Over the next few weeks, I continued attending gatherings, always careful to keep it a secret, especially from my family. The more I listened, the more questions I had. Amir and Layla answered them patiently, never pressuring me, only sharing their own experiences and understanding. One day, I finally voiced my greatest fear. "Why do you risk so much for your faith?" I asked Amir. "You know what could happen if you're caught." He smiled, a quiet certainty in his eyes. "Because it's the truth, Zab. Once you've experienced the love of Jesus, you can't go back. He gives us courage, even when the world tries to silence us." His words stayed with me long after I left. My heart was drawn to their faith, yet my mind was filled with fear. What would my father say? What would he do if he found out? One night, in desperation, I whispered a prayer unlike any I had ever prayed before. "God, if you're real, if Jesus really is who they say he is, show me. I don't want to be lost. I just want to know the truth." I didn't expect anything to happen, but for the first time I felt a flicker of hope. A dangerous turn. On the surface, my life remained the same. I went to classes, spent time with friends, and called my family every week, pretending everything was normal. But inside, a storm raged. The Bible's words, the kindness of the Christian community, the peace they carried, it all pulled me in one direction. Yet fear of my family, my upbringing, and the consequences of my actions yanked me back. Then, one afternoon, as I left a gathering, I noticed a man standing nearby. He looked like an ordinary passerby, but something about the way he watched me made my stomach drop. I kept my head down and hurried past him. The next day, Amir's warning confirmed my worst fears. "Be careful," he said, his tone serious. "There's been more surveillance in this area. Someone was arrested last week for attending a house church." My heart pounded. I had known the risks, but hearing them spoken out loud made them terrifyingly real. "You don't have to come if you're scared," Layla said later. I shook my head. "I'm not scared." It was a lie. That evening, my father called. His deep, commanding voice carried the weight of both love and authority. "Zab, how are your studies?" "They're going well, Baba," I replied. "And your prayers? Are you keeping up with them?" "Yes, Baba." Another lie. I had stopped praying the way I used to. Whenever I tried, I felt disconnected. Instead, I found myself drawn to the simple, heartfelt prayers at the gatherings. Prayers filled with warmth and intimacy, not obligation and fear. "Good," he said. "Never forget who you are and where you come from." His words lingered long after the call ended. That night, I opened the Bible again. This time, my eyes landed on a verse from John. "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." I read it over and over, letting the words sink in. I wanted that light. I longed for that peace. But how could I embrace it? How could I walk away from everything I had ever known? The dream. That night, I had a dream. I was walking through a dark tunnel, lost and afraid. No light, no direction, just endless shadows. Then a man appeared holding a lamp. His face was kind, and his eyes held a depth that seemed to see right through me. "Follow me," he said. I woke up with tears streaming down my face. I knew, without a doubt, that it was Jesus. The next day, I told Amir about my dream. His eyes lit up. "It's a sign, Zab," he said with conviction. "Jesus is calling you." Tears welled up in my eyes. "I don't know if I can do this," I whispered. Amir's voice was gentle. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. Just take it one step at a time." And in that moment, I realized maybe faith wasn't about having all the answers. Maybe it was about taking that first step into the light. The breaking point. Taking that step felt like stepping off a cliff. A week later, everything came crashing down. I was leaving another gathering when I saw him, the same man from before, but this time he wasn't alone. Two others flanked him, blocking my path. "Where are you coming from?" one of them demanded. I forced myself to stay calm. "Just a friend's house," I said, keeping my voice steady. They didn't believe me. One of them yanked my bag from my shoulder and rummaged through it. My stomach dropped as they pulled out the Bible. Their eyes lit up with triumph. "You think you can bring this filth into our country?" One of them sneered. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to move. They dragged me to a small, dimly lit room where the real nightmare began. For hours, they interrogated me. Who else was involved? Where were the gatherings? How long had I been attending? I refused to answer. Their threats grew harsher. "Do you know what happens to traitors like you?" One of them hissed. "Your family will disown you. You'll rot in prison." Tears streamed down my face, but I stayed silent. Eventually, they let me go, but not before delivering one final warning. "We'll be watching you. One wrong move, and you'll regret it." A decision in the dark. I stumbled back to my dorm, barely making it through the door before collapsing onto the floor, shaking. I had never been so afraid in my life. That night, Layla and Amir came to see me. "You're brave," Layla whispered, squeezing my hand. "I don't feel brave," I choked out. Amir's face was solemn. "This is the cost of following Jesus, Zab. But remember, he is with you always." That night, as I sat alone in my room, I made my decision. I couldn't keep living in fear. I couldn't keep running from the truth that had already taken root in my heart. I knelt beside my bed, my hands trembling. "Jesus, if you are who you say you are, I give you my life. I can't do this on my own anymore. Help me." For the first time, peace washed over me, deep, undeniable, and beyond words. But I also knew this was just the beginning. A line drawn in the sand. The days after my arrest were a blur of fear and tension. I felt like I was constantly being watched. Maybe I was. Every step I took, every word I spoke, every gathering I attended felt like a gamble. But even with the fear hanging over me, I couldn't stay away. Jesus had touched my heart in a way that no amount of fear could erase. One evening, my phone rang. It was home. As always, my mother's voice was soft, but this time there was something different. A sharpness. "Zab," she said, "your father wants to speak with you." My breath caught in my throat. Baba rarely interrupted our calls unless something serious had happened. Then his voice came through, booming and full of barely contained anger. "What is this? I hear about you spending time with Christians." My heart stopped. Had someone told them? Had the authorities contacted my family? I don't know what you mean, Baba," I stammered. "Don't lie to me," he roared. "We raised you to honor our faith, our family. Are you trying to shame us?" Tears burned my eyes. "I'm not doing anything wrong," I whispered. "Stay away from those people," he ordered. "Do you understand me? Stay away, or don't bother coming home again." When the call ended, I sat frozen, his words echoing in my mind. "Stay away, or don't bother coming home again." It felt like a knife to my chest. My family was everything. My father's approval, my mother's quiet love, my siblings' laughter. The thought of losing them was unbearable. That night, I cried until I had nothing left. But in the depths of my sorrow, I felt someone, holding me, a whisper in my heart, I am with you. A step of no return. A few weeks later, Amir pulled me aside after a gathering. Sab, he said, his tone gentle but firm. Some of us are planning a baptism next week. It's dangerous, but if you're ready, it's an important step. The words sent a shiver through me. Baptism, a public declaration of faith, a step that could never be undone. I need to think about it, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. For days, I wrestled with the decision. I knew what it meant. If I chose baptism, there would be no turning back. I would be declaring to the world and to myself who I truly was. Marked for faith. On the morning of my baptism, I woke up with a mixture of nervous energy and quiet resolve. We met in a secluded spot outside the city, a small hidden stream surrounded by trees. The air was thick with both anticipation and fear. Amir spoke softly, explaining the meaning of baptism, the outward sign of an inward transformation. Then, one by one, we stepped into the water. When it was my turn, my heart pounded. As Amir lowered me beneath the surface, an overwhelming peace washed over me. It felt as if all my fears, doubts, and burdens were being lifted, carried away by the water. When I emerged, tears streamed down my face, but for the first time, they were tears of joy. I was new. I was his. The first threat. That joy didn't last long. A few days later, as I returned to my dorm after class, I noticed a small folded note slipped under my door. We know what you've done. There will be consequences. My hands trembled as I read the words. My stomach twisted with dread. I glanced down the hallway, but it was empty. That night, my phone rang. My brother's voice came through, cold and unfamiliar. Zab, do you think we don't know? Do you think you can hide this from us? I swallowed hard. Hide what? My voice barely came out. Don't play dumb, he snapped. You've disgraced us. Baba is furious. Mama hasn't stopped crying. How could you do this to us? I gripped the phone tighter. I didn't do anything wrong. My voice shook, betraying the fear I was trying to suppress. You betrayed us, he said, his voice full of venom. You're no longer part of this family. The line went dead. I stared at the screen, numb. For days, I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I had lost the people I loved most in the world. The pain was unbearable. But in my sorrow, I clung to the words of Jesus. Whoever does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. I didn't fully understand those words yet, but I knew they carried a promise. A new family. The Christian community became my refuge. Layla and Amir stood by me, their kindness a lifeline in the storm. You're not alone, Layla whispered one night as I wept in her arms. We're your family now. Their love gave me the strength to keep going, even when fear threatened to consume me. One evening, as I sat with Amir, he said something that stayed with me. Zab, your story has power. God can use it to reach others who are searching for the truth. At first, the thought of sharing my journey terrified me. Exposing my struggles, my pain, it felt too raw, too dangerous. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized he was right. Jesus had given me a new life. How could I keep it to myself? The walls close. In the days that followed were a blur of tension. My baptism had drawn a line that couldn't be erased. I had crossed into dangerous territory, but I had no idea how quickly the walls would close in around me. One afternoon, as I left a prayer gathering, I noticed someone lurking near the entrance. Daria, a classmate from university. Zab, she called, her tone sharp. What are you doing here? My stomach clenched. Daria had always been outspoken in her disdain for Christianity. That's none of your business, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She smirked. Oh, but it is. You think no one's noticed your little secret life? You've changed, Zab, and I know why. I turned to walk away, but she grabbed my arm. I could report you, you know, she whispered. It would be so easy. I wrenched free and hurried away, but her words haunted me. How much did she know? And what would she do with that knowledge? The raid. A week later, I gathered with other believers in a small apartment for prayer. Layla and Amir weren't there that night. Suddenly, a loud banging shook the door. Open up! This is the police! Panic erupted. Ibrahim, one of the elders, motioned for everyone to stay calm as he went to answer. The moment the door opened, officers stormed in, shouting orders, flipping over furniture. They demanded our identification, rifling through drawers and bags. Then one of them found the Bibles and prayer books. His face darkened. You're all under arrest. The arrest. On your feet, one of the officers barked. My heart pounded as they slapped cold metal cuffs around my wrists and shoved us into waiting vans. The ride to the detention center was silent, thick with unspoken fear. At the facility, we were separated and led into dimly lit rooms. A stern-faced officer sat across from me, his expression unreadable as he flipped through a file. Zab, he muttered, scanning the pages. 22 years old, a good Muslim girl from a respectable family. What went wrong? I met his gaze. Nothing went wrong. The officer slammed his hand on the table, making me jump. Don't lie to me, he shouted. You've been associating with Christians, attending their illegal gatherings. Do you have any idea what that means? I stayed silent. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Do you know what happens to people like you? You think your family will protect you. They've already disowned you. The words struck like a punch to the gut. You're wasting your life on lies, he sneered. Jesus can't save you, but if you cooperate, we might let you go. Tears burned my eyes, but I held firm. Jesus already saved me. His expression darkened. With a sharp gesture, he signaled to the guards. Take her away. They threw me into a filthy, overcrowded cell. The air was thick with the stench of dampness and despair. An older woman with kind eyes scooted over, offering me a small corner of her thin blanket. What are you in for? She asked gently. Faith, I whispered. She nodded knowingly. You're not alone, child. God is with you, even here. Her words brought a flicker of comfort to my battered spirit. The trial days blurred into weeks. The interrogations were relentless, but I refused to betray my new family in Christ. Then, after 3 weeks, I received news. My trial was set. I had known this moment would come. In my country, converting to Christianity wasn't just seen as betrayal. It was a crime. I had heard stories of secret believers who vanished, never to be seen again. Would I become one of them? The courtroom was imposing, its high walls and cold silence pressing down on me. My parents sat stiffly in the audience, their eyes filled with shame and anger. I searched for my mother's gaze, but she turned away. The judge entered, his face as unyielding as stone. The prosecutor's voice rang out. She has abandoned her Islamic faith. She has dishonored her family by converting to Christianity, an act punishable by law. A murmur rippled through the room. When it was my turn to speak, my voice trembled, but a strange calmness settled over me. I did not abandon faith, I said. I found it. Gasps echoed through the crowd. The judge's eyes narrowed. Jesus changed my life, I continued. He brought me peace when I had none. I am not against Islam or anyone here. I only followed the truth I found in my heart. The murmurs grew louder. The judge silenced the room with a glare. This court is not here for philosophical debates. You will face the consequences of your actions. Then the sentence fell. 5 years. My breath caught. My chest tightened. 5 years in prison for apostasy and spreading false teachings. I had known the cost of following Jesus, but now I was paying it. As I was escorted out, my father stepped forward. His face was unreadable, but his voice cut like a blade. You have destroyed this family, he said coldly. I no longer have a daughter. I turned to my mother, desperate for a flicker of warmth, of love, but she remained silent, her face carved with sorrow. A light in the darkness prison was as cruel as I had feared. The guards were merciless. The other inmates kept their distance, whispering traitor under their breath. Yet even in the darkness, I clung to my faith. At night, in the stillness of my cell, I whispered prayers, and in those moments, I felt him, his presence, like a quiet warmth in my chest. One afternoon, a guard pulled me aside. There's a visitor for you. My pulse quickened. A visitor? I was led into a small, dimly lit room. Then I saw him, Amir. His face was filled with concern. Zab, he whispered, and for the first time in weeks, I felt hope. A new chapter begins. We're praying for you, Amir said softly. Stay strong. God is with you. His words wrapped around me like a lifeline, renewing my strength. Months passed in that cold prison cell. Then, one day without warning, a guard appeared. Pack your things, he grumbled. You're being released. I blinked in disbelief. Released? Just like that? Cautiously, I stepped out of the prison gates, my heart pounding with uncertainty. And then I saw them. Amir and Layla waiting for me. We don't know how, Amir said, shaking his head in wonder. But God has opened a door for you. Tears welled up in my eyes. Even in my darkest moments, God's hand had never left me. The sunlight warmed my face as I took my first breath of free air. But freedom wasn't without its cost. My family had disowned me. My future was uncertain. Layla reached for my hands, her smile gentle yet filled with conviction. Zab, God has plans for you. I nodded, though I had no idea what those plans were. All I knew was that I could never return to my old life. My path lay forward, in Christ, no matter how uncertain it seemed. A family in faith. The Christian community welcomed me back like a lost sister. They hid me in a safe house, shielding me from the ever-watchful eyes of the authorities. Fear loomed over us constantly, but our faith bound us together. Each day I prayed, studied the Bible, and shared my story with those around me. And with every retelling, I felt my faith deepen. My suffering hadn't been meaningless. It was part of something greater. One evening, Amir approached me with an idea. Zab, you've endured so much, yet your faith has only grown stronger. I think it's time you share your story, beyond these walls. The thought terrified me. Speaking publicly about my faith meant risking persecution, maybe even death. But as I prayed, a fire stirred in my heart, a call to be bold. With Amir and Layla's help, I began sharing my testimony in secret gatherings. At first, it was just a handful of people huddled in dimly lit basements, listening intently as I spoke. Then word spread. People came not to hear about me, but to hear about him. About his power to transform, sustain, and redeem. I was humbled to see how God was using my brokenness to bring light to others. Leaving home, finding purpose. Then the moment came. I knew I had to leave Iran. The decision shattered me. I loved my country despite its struggles. I longed to see my family again, but staying meant putting others at risk. With the help of Christian friends, I fled to a neighboring country. From there, I connected with believers around the world, sharing my story through underground networks and writing anonymously for Christian organizations. Still, my heart ached for my family. I prayed for them every day, asking God to soften their hearts. Then one day, an unexpected message arrived through a trusted contact. It was from my mother. "Zab, I miss you," she wrote. "Your father doesn't know I'm writing this, but I needed you to know." Tears streamed down my face as I read her words. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was a beginning. I wrote back, pouring out my love for her, sharing my journey, praying that one day she too would see the truth that had set me free. Walking in boldness today, I live in freedom. I carry the scars of my past, but they are not wounds. They are marks of a journey that led me closer to Christ. My faith has been tested in ways I never imagined, but through it all, God has been faithful. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know who holds it. My mission is clear: to be a voice for the persecuted, to share the love of Christ, and to walk boldly in His truth. If there's one thing my journey has taught me, it's this: redemption is always possible. No matter how broken or lost we feel, God's grace is enough to heal, restore, and transform. As I close this chapter of my life, I think back to the words that first led me to Jesus. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest."